my name is Jason Rose. I'm with Metro Transit, the transit authority here in Omaha. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a presentation that I hope doesn't go significantly over my allotted time. And so I'll probably just go through it and then take some questions at the end. So yeah, we're just going to dive in. Today, obviously, we're talking about conservation and transportation. And there's a lot of really great information, a lot of really great resources out there about this topic. A couple notes I wanted to make before I start my slides here. We know that public transit, which is what we do here in Omaha, gives us an opportunity to reduce air quality emissions, to enhance or encourage compact land development and land consumption. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation happening right now about what that looks like with COVID and how the densification works in the city. But overall, that's something that public transit has been proven to do. It allows us to decrease travel demand and lower emissions and provide a lower emission alternative to driving. There's a study that the Federal Transit Administration, so that's who we are a part of, put out, and it's dated. It's the federal government, so it's from 2010, and it's actually a survey over the previous couple decades. But it shows that of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, that transportation takes up about 29%. There's probably a selection of studies that show varied percentage breakdowns, but that's a pretty good sort of baseline. And we know within that 29% that 57% of that chunk is cars, SUVs, pickups, right? So mostly single occupancy vehicles. We know that freight is about 20% of that airlines are about 12%, and then there's that other chunk, which is where transit lives, which is about 10%. So a fraction of the pie is emissions directly from transit. So we know, obviously, we know that there are emissions that are a result of transit, but by being selective and strategic about how we operate service and encouraging folks to get on board, we can really significantly reduce our emissions. But then within that study, and I'd be happy to share the link, they show that if we see a shift from single occupancy vehicles to transit, that there's a pretty good reduction in individual emissions, right? So if somebody switches from single occupancy to transit, especially if it's like heavy rail, that's got a real drop, a 76% drop in emissions. Light rail is about 62%, and then bus transit if a bus is on an average load, which is about 28% nationally, we see a 33% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on a per trip basis. If the load is full, so if we have 40 people on a bus, we're looking at 82%. So significant reduction, especially if we can make sure that our buses are full. All right, I'm just going to dive in, and I'm going to talk through a little bit about the history and development. I'm going to talk through some of the things that we are doing right now at Metro, what we look for, what our parameters are, and then talk a little bit about orbit and the future of transit here. So we have three types of service, two active types of service right now. We have fixed and express routes, and those are the bigger buses that you see rolling around town. We have paratransit, which is our Moby service, and that's within a 3/4 mile buffer zone outside of our fixed route system map. That offers curb-to-curb service for those that can't physically get to a bus stop themselves. And then we have rapid transit, Orbit, which stands for Omaha Rapid Bus Transit, which we're going to be rolling out this fall. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail shortly. So what you're seeing right now is our system map. This has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. In 2015, we actually had a major system redesign where our previous map kind of meandered all over the city. There were a lot of routes to a lot of places, but a lot of them served very few people, and they weren't very efficient. So we kind of streamlined everything and brought stuff into the core, and that allowed us to provide more frequent service. When it comes to providing good transit, frequency is something we really like to do. And so we were able to increase the frequency of our buses in many cases to like a 15-minute frequency, which is the highest frequency we run right now. Route 18 in particular, and this is something that we do constantly. We're always evaluating where our ridership is and what our capacities are. So like Route 18, for instance, we just, before COVID, took that to 15-minute frequencies all day. So that's the idea there, is that you can go up to a bus stop and not necessarily have to worry too much about when the bus is coming, right? You can know that it's going to be coming in the next 15 minutes or less. I'm a bus rider myself. I take Route 13. I live kind of right by the zoo. And so I can go out to my bus stop right outside my house. And, you know, if it's during peak time, I can know that the bus is coming soon. I'm not as inclined to kind of check on that. But transit's been a factor in Omaha since the 1880s. It started with the streetcar, with a really solid streetcar network. And in fact, if you look at that network, those areas in town that are still areas that we like to go to that have really good walkability and encourage different types of transportation use are ones that were based on the streetcar line, because that was the lifestyle then, right? The development kind of occurred around really good transit, and people were more inclined then, obviously in the 1880s, in the early 1900s, to walk and almost exclusively walk and take streetcars. So that's why those developments are really people-centered. They developed around what people are doing. And then we see sort of as we expanded as a city, that became a little more car-centric, right? We're dropping in highways. We, as you can see here, we've doubled in population, but more than tripled in land consumption. Again, that's 2010, but we've only sprawled more since then. That extends to parking, right? This is downtown parking in 1941. And this is downtown parking in 2010. Significantly increased the amount of parking lots. And if we use our land on parking, that's not a very efficient use of that land. So moving on into sort of what we do and what we look for. I mentioned the 2015 changes that we made. We kind of shifted from a coverage-based system, which is on the left, to more of a frequency-based system on the right. It depends on the route. Some routes are kind of coverage routes because we, you know, before 2015 had served a lot of like service areas and maybe some retirement homes. So some of those are more coverage-based routes, but our frequency routes are the ones you'll see in the core of the system. So like the Midtown ones, the ones that pretty much exist east of 72nd Street. And the three big things that we look for when it comes to determining where routes go, primarily are density, accessibility, and cost. So this is just a map of what we identify as transit supportive areas, right? So these are the areas in town that either have 4 households or 5 jobs per acre. And that's a great indication of potential transit users is, are there people there, right? Are there people to pick up? Are there people to drop off? And so all the green areas you can see are areas that we would determine as transit supportive. And then our route map is laid over that. So you can kind of see that we do serve a lot of those really dense areas. Where it gets tricky is where you have non-consecutive areas or areas that there are gaps, right? So for instance, you know, this Southwest Omaha is an area, something that we get asked about a lot, that we talk about a lot. And you're going to see a lot of non-consecutive areas here that it's harder to pick up and drop off people, especially when you're talking about a highway. That reduces the efficiency of our service quite significantly if you're having to get off the highway to potentially navigate a service road or something like that, or a frontage road to get to where you're going. I should say as well, our technical service boundary right now is the city limits, so the city proper. So anything that is in this area, La Vista, Ralston, Papillion, we do have contracted service. That's our express route. But those are determined by those municipalities, and we just provide that service. That's what happens in Council Bluffs too. So Council Bluffs kind of determines the level of service that they want, and we provide it. That's something that could likely change with a potential regional authority that we're looking at right now, but that's kind of where we're at now. Accessibility is another main one. And we talk about the built environment a lot in compact development. This is just a comparison between a spot on 52nd Street and a spot on 78th Street. 52nd Street is, it's a really good area for pedestrians. You can see great sidewalks with a lot of setbacks from the houses. There's a lot of traffic calming devices in having just trees close to the roadway. It doesn't encourage speeding as much or increase speeding at all. But the 78th Street, not a great area to walk, not a great area to bike. It makes it tough to serve transit here because every trip starts and ends with getting to the road, right? So that makes it a little more difficult. So we look at that kind of stuff. This is another great example. So prior to 2015, we served both Park Ave and Park Drive. After 2015, we pulled service from Park Drive. And so just a little bit of comparison, you know, these buildings on Park Ave are really pulled up close to the road. So access from the bus to the destination is really good. There's bike lanes, there's protected walkways by having parking on street there. Park Drive, on the other hand, if we were to drop you off here, there's a lot of barriers to getting to where people are going, and the density is not quite what it is at Park Ave, right? So a great example is if we drop somebody off on this side of the road on the left side, they'd have to scale a lot of landscaping to get to, you know, an area that doesn't have good pedestrian environment, which makes it especially difficult if you're in a wheelchair. So essentially what we're talking about is an area that's designed for people is a really good place to serve transit. An area that's designed for cars is not. West Maple is another great example. We get a lot of questions about that. Service on West Maple is tough because there's no sidewalk. If we were to drop you off here, you'd have to cross a highway. You'd have to cross a drainage ditch to get to a big box store that's full of cars, right? A large parking lot full of cars. Makes it more difficult to serve. So that's why we kind of concentrate our service in these areas. And that's why that compact land development would allow people to live in these areas, to potentially work in these areas, spend time in these areas, and not necessarily have to use their car as much, thereby reducing some of the emissions there. Finally, we look at cost. We can talk about this in some detail as much as you all want to, so I won't go into too much, but we know that per capita we spend, we get allotted a lot less than many of our competing cities. So if anyone goes to these other places like Minneapolis or Denver or even Kansas City, the spending is quite a bit lower here. So we're looking at $37 per capita. The national average is about $75 per capita, so we're spending less than half of that national average here in Omaha. Hopefully something we can change soon. One thing that we've done recently is we added a lot of new bus shelters, and I bring this slide up because we also are transitioning our bus fleet. Traditionally, we used just a diesel bus system, right? And in the last 3 or 4 years, we brought in a lot of new buses, and we're transitioning them to either compressed natural gas or clean diesel. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about electric buses and greater reduction in our emissions from a vehicle perspective. What makes that tricky right now is that they're very expensive. Electric vehicles are very expensive. The average bus for us, we spend between $300,000 and $400,000 per unit. An electric bus is about $600,000 per unit. And I apologize if you hear my kids in the background. We're having a birthday party later today, so they're getting excited. But that's not to say it's not worth investing in, right? That's something that we actually got a grant for a couple of years ago, is to build up our electric infrastructure and kind of set a foundation for potential electric buses in the future. Because it's not only buying the buses, it's buying the infrastructure and the charging mechanisms for that. What we're seeing in a lot of other cities is that it's difficult to run a bus all day, which is what we do a lot. We have buses that are out there all day, and they need to be able to get in and get charged as well. So there are a variety of options there that a lot of places are testing. We just haven't quite gotten there yet, but that's something that we're looking at. Okay, so finally, Orbit. I'm going to kind of breeze through this and I can answer any questions. But what we're doing with Orbit is in 2014, we did a study that, to no one's surprise, indicated that Dodge Street is pretty disconnected, that there's a lot of great nodes of activity, but we need better service, right? And we, out of that study, there were a couple different options. One of them was a streetcar. It's a conversation that has been had quite a bit on and off in the last few years as a solution to this problem. The other option was bus rapid transit. So that's what we're doing with Orbit. We're connecting people with technology, with better travel pattern or environment, a better travel environment with bigger buses, better stations, and more frequent service. So in short, this is kind of what it is. And this map is actually a little dated too, because we added a stop at the Keystone Trail. But we're hitting major destinations along the route from Westroads to downtown. The station at Westroads is a single station. Everything else is a station pair. So there's one on the north side, one on the south side to provide east and west access. And then once you drop down into Douglas, we kind of do this downtown loop. So ways it's different than our current service, we're building out a lot bigger stations, and one of the main elements here is a raised platform. So the platform of the station is the same height as the floor of the vehicle. So that provides really great access for those in wheelchairs, those with strollers, and then bikes, which are going to be allowed on board the buses to be put up into bike hangers. One of the things that slows down our service right now is paying at the fare box. Not right now, because we are actually fare free boarding through the back door, but typically we could lose up to a couple minutes per bus stop, which adds up as a bus travels down the route. So what we're doing is having those fare payments occur off board with ticket vending machines. And then another element that we've added to our system is MyRide. If anyone uses MyRide, it's fantastic. It's a way to track your bus in real time. So we have apps in both app stores. There's a website, and then there's a text message system as well. I use it all the time. I get a text every morning between 7 and 8 that says, you know, my bus is arriving in the next 5 minutes. That's one of the biggest barriers to transit in this city, really in any city, is where is my bus for real? If you're depending on a schedule, we might be early or late depending on traffic and weather and whatnot. But this lets you know with certainty that your bus is going to be there or where it is. One of the things that Orbit stations will have is digital display signs that'll show when your next bus is arriving, so you won't necessarily have to have a device or access to the internet at all. Another thing we're doing is the bus itself is a lot bigger. It's a 60-foot articulated bus with 3 doors. So the idea is that this bus pulls up, all 3 doors open. You can board through any bus, or any door rather, and that'll improve the efficiency of our onboard offboard process quite a bit. These are powered by compressed natural gas. As I mentioned earlier, it's something we're transitioning our fleet to, and we're having free Wi-Fi on bus and at Orbit stations. That's something that the rest of our bus fleet has right now currently is free Wi-Fi as well. And then there's a couple different on the road elements. So those are like the assets that we have a lot of control over. The roadway is less the case. Ideal bus rapid transit would have a dedicated lane the whole way. Dodge being a state highway makes it a little more tricky, but we're hoping we can get there with future lines. But one thing that we are able to do here is what's called transit signal priority. So that's where our bus sends a signal to the traffic light, and it can hold a green light for us and let us bypass those busier intersections. And then downtown, that downtown loop, as we loop around Douglas and come back around on Dodge, we'll have a bus lane. It's semi-dedicated technically because there's a lot of turning movement that happens, but it will be a dedicated bus lane with stripes and signage. And then finally, we have a park and ride at West Road. So that was the end terminus of the route because that was kind of the limit of our federal grant. We won a $15 million competitive federal grant in 2014. And that allowed, that provided about half of the cost of the project. The remainder of the cost has been the result of a lot of local philanthropy and a little bit of a contribution from Metro as well. But the majority of the cost of this project is being paid for by either competitive or outside dollars that we wouldn't have otherwise. So we have 75 dedicated parking stalls in this area. This is actually in right now. So this our first canopy installation went in earlier this week. Check out our website or look everything up on social media. We posted a lot of stuff regarding this installation, and we got some really cool video around that. But it's in. You can go check it out if you want to. It's really cool. And then sort of where this sits regionally, we are hoping that this is the first line in a potential future network of rapid transit. So the solid line here is the current Orbit line. We've investigated all sorts of additional lines, including extensions out to potentially Elkhorn. The one on the east side goes out to Council Bluffs, potentially as far as Iowa Western. This is the north-south line on the east side shows, I think that's about 24th Street, and that's like an MCC Fort to MCC South connection. And then the one on the west side is up and down 72nd Street. So that would be a really great connection from about the 72nd and Ames on down to Papillion, La Vista, Ralston. If you are interested in anything that we're doing, we're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Follow us there, ask us questions. I'm one of the administrators on our social accounts, so if you want to get a hold of me at all, feel free to reach out via those avenues. And then finally, I kind of want to talk about where we're going next. I alluded to the Regional Transit Authority earlier, and that's something that was passed in the last legislative session in 2018, 2019. It's been a wild couple of years, but what that allowed is for our board to vote to become regional, and that would allow us to incorporate some of these outside entities. So where it's difficult to serve some of these areas outside of the city boundaries, this regional authority would allow us to broaden that out. So we just put some prices to it, and we're going to do some more fine-tuned digging into that in the next few months. But what we're working on right now is some cost-neutral improvements. We've already made some. We have increased the frequency of like Route 24, for instance, which is an MCC Fort campus or connection down from Fort down to South. It's a great route, and we had a high ridership there, so we increased the service to 15-minute frequencies during the day, which is about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We know that we, as I mentioned earlier, some of the best areas that we can serve are the ones that are in the core of our system. So we're looking at some potential improved frequencies on those routes, and we kind of outlined some of the costs involved with that. And then finally, broadening regionally, we're looking at for some of these further orbit lines. But I do want to drop out from there because I would like to answer any questions anyone has. And I saw one come up.
Cool. Yeah, we had one question from an anonymous attendee. They're wondering if there are any community gardens that are kept on parking lot roofs, or if there are any parking lot canopies with vegetation planted on top.
You know, I don't know that there are any in Omaha. Maybe Julie and Kevin might have an idea. I've definitely seen that as a design in other cities, and it's a great opportunity to kind of spread our greenery around the city. I'm not sure if there are any here, though.
Yeah, we actually, as I saw that question come up, I wanted to let this person know that we're going to have a green infrastructure event on June 30th with the city and stormwater management. So they're going to be highlighting, there are some pretty cool green roof projects in Omaha, like the new addition onto Central High School is a green roof, and they're really very beautiful, and I'm excited to see more of them. You guys, if you want to type any questions you have into the Q&A, and I'll kind of fill in with a couple questions that came up for me as I was listening. So firstly, I was wondering what prompted the initial streamlining and efficiency in 2014 within Omaha Metro?
Yeah, so that came out of a couple different sources. There was an alternatives analysis. That's the study that led to eventually Orbit and the streetcar. That happened in 2012. But that kind of looked at our current system and looked at some of the inefficiencies that we had. There were a variety of other feedbacks that we heard from, or feedbacks that we had gotten. I know the Omaha Community Foundation did a series of studies on things including transportation. And the main thing that we saw was that people had to wait a long time to get to a bus, right? With our limited budget, the best thing that we could do currently would be to, like we had done, kind of condense some routes, bring some routes into closer to the core where we know service is going to be good. And that allowed us to provide more frequency there. So it was from a couple different sources. I would say like the ultimate push was from that alternatives analysis.
Cool. One other thing with the parking lots, I guess this is sort of just an open question, but why is it that people put in so many parking lots? Is that just because?
Man, that's the question of the day, isn't it? And I'm sure Julie and Kevin have a lot of good input on that.
Yeah, and for you guys, if you want to chime in at all or ask any questions, like what's the deal with parking lots? And I'm like, if you're going to put it in a parking lot, at least like it'd be so cool. Creighton has those shade structures that have solar panels on them, or to do a green roof or something like that.
Yeah, we're not short on good ideas. That's for sure. It just, a lot of them haven't been pulled in here, right? I think what we started seeing over the last few decades, and this gets to kind of the broader conversation about urban design, especially post World War II, is that, you know, when we started becoming more of a car-based society, our infrastructure responded to that. That's part of the reason that you see a lot of one-ways downtown, because it was built to funnel people into downtown and then get them right back out. There wasn't a lot of staying that happened. It was more based on getting people to a location and then kicking them out of there. So I think our infrastructure responded pretty significantly, especially in more of and this happened kind of all over the Midwest, right? Where we had plenty of space to grow. We don't have a development boundary. That's something that like Seattle and Boulder, a lot of these cities that have really dense compact development, they have these boundaries where they're restricted on how far they can go. And we kind of let things run somewhat rampant because, you know, the land is cheaper out west, right? Land is cheaper in the green areas. That's something that I think the chamber's keyed in on right now. And I know one of the questions you had mentioned is like, what do we want to see from the future of transportation? I think there's a lot of opportunity right now with the Chamber's Connect Go initiative. And there's just a lot of opportunity to bring in the business community and really encourage those infill development areas.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you guys, Julie and Kevin? What do you think on?
What do you guys think?
I would say on the parking question, it's political, it's cultural. I mean, you know, everyone, when it comes to in Omaha, we want to park at the front door. We don't want to park and walk any distance at all. And unfortunately, that's sort of a chicken and the egg. We've created all this parking so people get used to it and they think it's their constitutional right to park by the front door. But you know, when we suggest alternatives that might include taking parking out or reducing the number of spaces or reconfiguring it to a safer design, all of these things, I mean, it's an uproar, and then the phones at City Hall start to ring, and then
sure
it's downhill from there.
Business pushback too, because they think,
Yeah.
oh, well, if they park, then they won't come, which isn't, from my point of view as a 30-something, like that's not true at all. For, you know, I would probably support a business if they were like, get rid of the parking lot, people will find a way to come because they love our product, you know, or whatever. But what about you, Kevin? Thoughts?
Even on the day after Thanksgiving, which is the biggest shopping day of the year, like the parking lot at, say, Target at Westroads, or I'm sorry, at Crossroads, it's at its peak is maybe only 80% full. Like, but the reason we built parking is there was a long period of mandated parking minimums. Like if you're going to have X number of square feet or X number of units in your development, you have to have X number of parking spots. And that's even developers now are starting to push back against that. I was at a community meeting for an apartment development, and people were very concerned that there weren't going to be enough parking spaces at the apartment building, and so the parking would spill out into the surrounding neighborhood. So parking is so personal to a lot of people. Like I lived in Chicago for 4 years, and you know, parking there is practically a birthright. And in Omaha, we have very similar attitudes about it.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that comes up over and over, especially when you're talking about transportation, is that it is so cultural. Yeah, so we have a couple questions and then maybe we'll move on to Julie. But Stephanie Fogel is wondering if with UNO tuition and free UNO tuition going free for households under $60,000, are you anticipating a drop off in the public transit from the Metro Fort area?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility. So a lot of what we see at MCC South and the Fort campus is, I mean, some of the students there are going for like an associate's to transfer, but a lot of them are going for some of the industrial, the more industrial programs and stuff like that. So if we're talking about MCC versus UNO, for us, that would really just shift. We have a really great pass program with UNO, UNMC, MCC, where any student, staff, or faculty can ride for free. So probably what would happen is if a student would go to UNO, hopefully they would kind of carry on their transportation use. And that's been a fantastic program for us. And then, does that answer it? Sort of?
I think so.
So the answer is maybe, but hopefully we can retain our riders as they transition over to the Nebraska system.
Well, and especially with the, with the orbit, those places for people to wait are so nice. I mean, when I'm going up Dodge, I'm like, wow, that's really, it definitely makes it a bigger point of like, look what's here for you. This is amazing.
Yeah, and it's a greater experience for a rider. If you've ever stood by a bus stop sign, you'll know that like it doesn't feel like much, right? We have 2,500 bus stops around the city, so it's hard to have that level of amenity everywhere from a cost and a maintenance perspective. But we want to find those areas that really that can support it for sure.
So one thought that I had, and then I'll move on to Clyde and Mary Anderson's question. I was wondering, you mentioned something about the grant for an electric bus system, and Justin, your previous comment as well about wanting to have the amenities, but the cost is prohibited. Could there potentially be something like OPPD did with community solar, where they said, hey, will you chip in extra to have, your energy come from solar? Could there be something like that with like a community electric transit situation to kind of gauge if there's support?
That's certainly a possibility. And that's so as we're kind of going through with this potential regional plan and this partnership with Connect Go. If you're not familiar with Connect Go, their goal is to provide or to kind of come up with a unified transportation vision. There's been many plans over the last few years, and this vision is meant to tie it all together. So I think there's opportunities there to assess like the demand, the desire from the community. And what we're going to try to do as we potentially transition into a regional authority is look at what other types of service we can provide beyond just electric buses, right? We're talking flex routes, van pooling. I mean, there's a lot of areas in those low dense environments that it's hard to provide service with fixed route with a bigger bus, but there's other opportunities with other vehicles. So those are all things we're going to be exploring sort of in that process. And I think that's certainly a good idea. We have a really good relationship with OPPD and MUD. And as we have to build up our electric infrastructure to support something like an electric bus, those are definitely conversations we can have. So it's a good model for sure.
Cool. Very cool. Well, this last question is, they're asking, your bus photo was taken on 16th Street. Are there still plans to reroute the bus routes off downtown 16th Street?
Okay. Clyde, is that the first one? The first opening slide? Because I think that was actually on Farnham. But either way, so what we're doing downtown is we are adjusting some of the routes to get them more off of Dodge and Douglas, right? We're trying to free up that road a little bit so Orbit can pass through a little more easily. So we've shifted some of our east-west routes to like the Farnham area, or even farther down to like Howard and whatnot. But as far as north-south connections, we're trying to maintain those as much as possible because we want to provide good access north-south to be able to connect with our east-west routes.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. I'm super excited for all the changes that are coming down the pipeline.
Me too. Thank you.
Big improvement. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody, we're going to switch over to Julie Harris with Bike Walk Nebraska. And let you take it away there.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Well, I don't suppose you can see that.
No, not yet.
Okay, sorry.
You're good. Jason, do you have any tips I don't see on my screen where a share screen would be. Do you have any tips for Julie?
So Julie, if you go down to the bottom bar where you'll see like participants Q&A chat, you should see a share screen option there too.
Yeah,
Is
I
that what
don't
you're clicking
have the
on?
bottom bar. It was there for a while, but I don't have it now, which is odd.
Hmm.
Well,
Is your window on? Do you have like a full screen window?
no.
Well, that's okay. Maybe,
You want to go ahead and go, and I'll see if I can.
Kevin, do you want to jump in and we can troubleshoot over?
Sorry about that.
It's
Yeah, no
okay.
problem.
All right, so we're gonna switch over to Kevin with Mode Shift Omaha.
All right. I think I am still muted.
You're good. We can hear you, Kevin.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I am unmuted. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Flatowicz-Farmer. I'm the board chair of Mode Shift Omaha. Mode Shift Omaha advocates for transportation options that enhance the quality of life and opportunities for everyone to live, work, and play in our community. We envision a city where everyone can safely and efficiently use sidewalks, use their bicycles, take public transit, or use other sustainable and less costly modes of transportation. We want everybody to have a say through democratic and transparent processes and how the city and streets are designed and funded, and experience a high quality of life. Now, our main function as an organization has been through education and activation. So we, provide information for people about how, good cities are built. We have had events such as the Heyday on May Day, which was back in 2012. Ooh. Demonstrating how we can best build the city. We have looked at things like urban land use. For example, we activated to save the SPECT building on Douglas a few years ago when they wanted to tear it down to make a surface parking lot. It's a historic building. It's a useful building. It's an important structure for the fabric of the neighborhood. And so we built a rally around, saving that structure. So that's, and when the city decided that they didn't want to have a full-time bike ped coordinator, we had a rally around that. Less successful than our rally to save the SPECT. One of the things that we really have been hitting on recently is pedestrian access and sidewalk access. It's been very important to us that everybody has access to safe sidewalks because ultimately every trip using any form of transportation begins with a walk. You walk out your front door, even if it's just into your driveway, and it ends with a walking trip. Usually it's from your car. For most people, it's from their car to their destination. But for a lot of people, it's from a bus to their destination. It's from their home to their destination. It's from a bike to their destination. And having safe, accessible sidewalks has been an important aspect of our mission. One of the things that we've done is advocated for transportation accessibility and also making sure that in the election process or in our elections, the candidates are asked questions about transportation, which usually isn't a big issue. In most elections, people have other issues that are, top of mind, but ultimately, and for example, we just had a bond issue in the city where, we're asked to make decisions about transportation. We need to do that in an informed way. So what we do is we have monthly member meetings, we have monthly coffee chats. Our different teams have monthly engagement events. So we have a team organized around transit. We have a team organized around walkability. We also have a team titled the Missing Middle Housing Project. And what they're doing is they're working for a more dense city, which leads to better walkability and better transit access. We have advocated for greater transparency in the city, specifically around the capital improvement program, which is a 6-year plan the city publishes every year around how they're going to spend our money to build the city, basically. And when we began working on this project, it was an opaque process. And as we've looked deeper into it, asked more questions, the city has become more transparent in how they monitor and develop their capital improvement program. So, and one of the things that we talk about is that every place tells a story. You can actually determine by just looking into your environment what the decisions were that developed that space. So, for example, things that even look similar, like a farm and a park, they have some similar characteristics, like large green spaces, but you can see that in the park, the space was built for use by human beings. And if you think about the neighborhoods, and Jason touched on this earlier, the neighborhoods that are built at a human scale are generally the neighborhoods that are most attractive to human interaction. So places like Dundee, Benson, South 24th, Florence, Old Millard, even Village Point. And here we have the old market, where you can see it's not exclusive. It's not excluding motor vehicle traffic, but you can see that the environment really is built to accommodate human beings and their interactions with one another. And here we have some examples of some automobile-only environments. At 144th and W, there's a sidewalk on each side, but nobody would ever want to walk on those. 156th and Maple, the cross section of the street is 8 lanes and 100 feet of pavement, which is not welcoming to anybody on foot or using a mobility device or using transit. To go back to Jason's point that parts of the city are just impossible to serve by transit. Down at 76th and Cass, we can see that we have 5 lanes of traffic. We have sidewalks, but the sidewalks aren't really going anywhere. And then at 84th and West Center, actually at 84th and West Center, there used to even be a crossing signal for pedestrians, and that was removed by the city because they didn't feel like it served enough people. And so it's even more dangerous to use, even though it is a transit stop. It's a place where people, get on and off a bus, and they might have to cross the street, but there's no safe way for them to cross. So one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome is the inconsistent application of sidewalks. And this is a great map, and you can actually see the development of the city over time, starting over on the right side of the map. We've got, pre-war, pre-1940s, near 100% coverage of sidewalks. And then as we developed through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even 80s, we see that sidewalks were less important to development, and they preferenced automotive travel. And then you can see around the 1990s, they began to mandate that sidewalks be included in developments, and into the 2000s, where we have 100% coverage again. So one of the challenges that we're come up against is sort of an engineer's idea of what is safe and a human being's idea of what is livable. So you can see on that left side, the Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. That's a very safe street. You're not going to have any pedestrian incidents because there's no place for pedestrians. You're not going to have people running off the road into a tree because there's no trees on the side of the road. And then you look at the road on the right, the Leesburg, Florida. There's a place where it's an environment that was clearly designed for a mixture of activities. It's a place where you can sit, it's a place where you can walk, it's a place where you can drive, it's a place where you can shop and maybe grab a bite to eat. So to talk to this slide, how much safer are livable streets? When you create a street where that's built at the human scale, you have 40% fewer mid-block crashes and 67% fewer roadside crashes than other roadway forms. Okay, this is something that we're really excited about. One of the projects that we built our entire organization around was one proposed back in 2011 by the consultants that helped us develop the transportation master plan. Was they said, hey, you've got this one-way street that goes down into downtown. It's way of traffic heading into downtown. What if we took some of those lanes and created entirely with landscaping, and we widened the sidewalks, and we were so excited about it. That was the basis of our heyday and Mayday. And this is sort of the dream that they came up with, is that we would have cycle tracks, we'd have walkable areas, and in addition to vehicle lanes. Now, the word is that this year, the Harney Street cycle track will become a reality. And Julie can speak to this a little more, because I know that she's Yay! At what point did I cut out?
We got a glimpse of the gorgeous Harney Street project with the cyclist and the grass, and then it cut out just a bit.
Perfect. Okay. This is going to become a reality this year. Her organization is more intimately involved in the development of the cycle track. So when we talk about safe streets, we have to talk about zones for everybody. Right now, the zones that we really care about are the zones for automobiles, and then we don't really care about zones for people or bikes or transit. Take, for example, Dodge Street at 50th, right outside the Dundee Theater. Nobody in their right mind would ever want to actually walk on that sidewalk It's maybe 36, 42 inches wide against 5 lanes of fast moving traffic. So the way that you create a safe street is you create a sense of place for people. You provide space for cyclists. You create high visibility areas where pedestrians or people on bikes are going to be crossing across a vehicle zone. Currently, the city of Omaha will not paint crosswalks except near schools. They say it's because it gives people a false sense of security and safety, which makes one question why they would want to do that near schools. But it's about creating spaces where everybody knows where they belong, and everybody can see one another. And that's the safest way to design a street. Uh, 50-second and Radial. If you go onto our YouTube channel, you can see we actually did a whole video series about how dangerous that area is, and we actually got the city to improve the timing on the lights and the painting of the crosswalks, which they hadn't done for many years. If you want to know more about Mode Shift, you can always hit us up on Facebook, Mode Shift Omaha. We're also on Twitter, and you can visit our website at modeshiftomaha.org. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin. We had one question. Someone's wondering if there's a group like Mode Shift that's in Lincoln.
There's a Lincoln cycling organization. I don't know if there's a multimodal active transit advocacy organization in Lincoln. Not that I know of. I'm pretty sure there's a cycling organization, and Julie might know better than I.
Perfect opportunity to start one.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding as well. Lincoln has a really great cycling advocacy community, but nothing that's multimodal beyond bicycling.
I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of multimodal organizations that I've come across in the U.S.
Why do you think?
Go ahead, Michaela.
Why do you think that is? That there aren't many multimodal organizations?
People get siloed in their particular interests. Even within our group, we've got a cycling team, we've got a transit team, we've got a walkability team, we've got an urban form team, we've got a transparency team, and oftentimes organizations just sort of focus on their one narrow area of interest. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, it's all related. You can't talk about bikes without talking about people using sidewalks. You can't talk about transit without talking about walkability. They're all interconnected, and the way that your governments make decisions are going to affect you, and the choices that are available to you. One of the challenges that we have in Omaha is sort of a chicken and egg thing. Is the city doesn't want to invest in, say, bicycle infrastructure because people don't ride bikes as transportation, and it's like, well, if you invested in bicycle transportation or bicycle infrastructure, people would choose riding their bikes. And we've got a great bike share organization with Heartland B-Cycles. We're bringing back the scooters, for the love of God, and but we're not investing in a system of infrastructure to support those modes of transportation. So yeah, so everything sort of connects together.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I live on 78th Street and people definitely go faster than 30 miles an hour on this street. But it's like, it seems like it wouldn't be that hard even just to put one of the signs up that says like cyclists can have the whole road, and to paint on, you know, the biking image that lets people know that, hey, cyclists can use the whole lane. But then again, it's that cultural component of not having people honk at you and yell things at you while you're biking.
Yeah. One of the challenges also that we come against in Omaha is, and this is just such wonky crap that most people are probably just going to go to sleep listening to it, is sort of there's a difference between the posted speed and the design speed. And oftentimes Omaha streets are built about 10 or 15 miles above the posted speed. Like they're designed to accommodate vehicle speeds at a much higher speed than they end up posting. And there are design elements that the city could employ that would slow traffic down, and they just don't.
Yeah. So my husband and I moved here last year, and he'd never lived in Omaha before, and we were moving from Los Angeles, which people think people who drive in Los Angeles are crazy drivers. And we moved here and he was like, this place is crazy. Like people drive nuts here, and looked up the stats, and it's like Omaha is something like the worst drivers in
we are the worst drivers in the United States.
That's not something to be proud of.
No.
Not something good to be number one in.
No, I moved here from San Diego, and I didn't understand there's this culture of tailgating in Omaha on the interstate that just terrifies me.
It's so scary. I laugh, but it's not funny.
No, it's
one thing. So we kind of checked off. I underlined safe cycling because I've been a cyclist in Omaha before, and that was even in the Midtown area, and it can be pretty scary for the reasons that we've just outlined. But then moving on to a brighter note, the heyday on May Day looked awesome, and that project is actually happening.
Somebody wrote a check.
That's so exciting. That's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's going to be a pilot project. So it's not a permanent installation. And
okay.
Like I said, Julie can speak on this in more detail. But it's supposed to happen this year. It's actually going to be longer than originally planned, so that's always good. But it is going to be on Harney Street, and it's going to be a two-way cycle track, and so I can't complain about that.
Yeah. Let's see. Anybody else, if you guys want to type in a question in Q&A, otherwise I'm going to roll with just a couple more questions. Let's see. One I wrote down was about the CIP transparency and your note about just asking more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote it down because I feel like that's an important thing for me to understand, like ask more questions if you don't understand something, if you're concerned about it. But then also I was wondering if there were any success stories of saying like, hey, we don't think that this should be allocated for this, you know, and they wouldn't do it. Has that ever happened?
I wish we don't. But what I can say is that with the CIP, two of our board members just dug in deep. And if you go on our website, we did a multi-part series just describing sort of how the CIP is created, who's accountable for it, who isn't accountable for it, how projects get into the plan, and whether or not they're evaluated according to the city charter. which as far as we could tell, they were not. So while we weren't able to say, cancel a road widening or make sure that, we got a particular bike lane, what we did do is the city became more transparent as to how they presented the CIP, and it's a clearer process. It's still not fully transparent. It's still something that we need to work on. But mainly what we did is we educated people as to, like, this is how your tax money's spent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it's planned out. And oftentimes the projects and the allocation of our tax money isn't necessarily based on what the people want or what they would expect, but on outside factors that have more influence at the top.
Yeah, that's important. Somebody's asking what methods you use to persuade people to switch to biking and using public transport. I'm not sure.
Mainly it's through engagement. As far as biking, we do advocate for improved bicycle infrastructure. As far as public transportation, what we found is that one of the barriers to entry is that people just don't know how to ride a bus.
Yeah.
And so we do a regular event where we invite people to come with us and ride the bus with us, and they can learn how to ride the bus, learn how to get a transfer, learn about parts of the city that are served by transit, and sort of the fun things you can do there on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, that's cool. That's something once it's safe to do so, I'm super excited to get out there and use that bus line.
Another thing that we've done is our walkability team has done just an excellent job advocating with the city to improve how they manage sidewalks during construction. Because we noticed over the last few years there were multiple incidences where both sides of the street would be blocked. Like the sidewalks would be blocked by construction, and people using the sidewalk would not have a good idea of where to go. And so we've advocated with the city, and we've actually made substantial progress with them putting together a written policy of how they manage sidewalks during construction.
That's awesome.
So that's the fun, exciting stuff we do.
Yeah. Cool. I'm so glad you guys are doing it. One last thing that really stuck out to me as being very poignant was the point you made about safe versus livable, and how when you actually break it down, it's more like safe-ish, versus actually safe, and actually a place where people want to be. So that's just cool to be able to start to envision what our city could look like. That's really cool. And then the last thing was just a thought that I'd like to share was, I was just reading this book called The Future We Choose, and they're talking about how, it's really important to envision the world that you want. And one of the things that they were saying is, like, eventually even having complete street closures where the streets are then turned into totally different ways to use that space. And I don't know, it's cool to think about. So.
And right now that's happening throughout the world, in Europe, in South America, and even in some American cities. Cities are noticing that there's not as many cars that are using the roads, but we have the roads, and we have people that want to get out, but we don't want them to be too close to each other. And so there's cities that are just closing, saying, hey, you can't drive here anymore. Yeah. But you can use your bike, you can walk here. And I don't have a lot of I don't think it's going to happen here in Omaha. It would be nice if it did, but it's a thing where we can see in their example what's possible. Mm-hmm. And not to bring up the pandemic, but we're all thinking about it. there's a good chance that once we come out the other side of this, everything's going to be different. How we move is going to be different. How we travel is going to be different. The places we want to go or are comfortable going is going to be different. And we need to have the courage to rethink how we build our cities.
Yeah, I like that you bring up courage. I think there's a lot to that. Stephanie Fogel commented in the Q&A saying that there's a podcast called War on Cars that was just recently talking about street closing, which I hadn't heard of that podcast, so I'm going to write it down. And which is a good thing. I wanted to just open this up to anyone who's in the webinar or any of the panelists. If you guys have specific links or books or things that you guys think other people would enjoy, just go ahead, type them into the chat box so everyone can kind of get that benefit from your own experience. And if there's no more questions for Kevin, I think we'll move on to Julie. Julie, ready? Any more questions for Kevin?
Okay, I think, let's see if I can make this work.
You can do it, Julie.
I can do it if it only would. Oh my goodness gracious. Well,
we're bearing with you.
We can see you.
Yeah. We can see you.
Maybe. Cross your fingers.
Yay!
Success!
Oh, excellent. Okay. Sorry, everyone, for all the technical issues here. So I'm Julie Harris, and I'm the Executive Director of Bike Walk Nebraska. We are a bicycle and pedestrian advocacy organization that we advocate for safe and accessible active transportation in Nebraska through partnerships, education, and advocacy. And we've been around since 2013. We started out just as the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance, so just focusing on bicycles, but kind of as we were talking about earlier, you know, every trip starts and ends as a pedestrian in most cases. And so it was hard for me in particular, being a one-person organization, it was hard for me to talk about just biking and not biking and walking. And so, you know, over the years, even though bicycling was in our organizational name, walkability and walking was always part of the work we did. And so we rebranded about 18 months ago to be Bike Walk Nebraska. So we're statewide. We're based in Omaha, but we cover all points west, 450 miles west. It's like thousands and thousands and thousands of square miles. And, you know, I have colleagues that do similar jobs with similar organizations across the country. You know, there's the Delaware guy, and the Delaware guy has, you know, like less land mass than the city of Omaha or something. I don't know. But so we have a challenge in terms of trying to get the message out and to understand how the different parts of our state, whether it be rural versus urban, whether it be west versus east, panhandle versus whatever. I mean, there's just all kinds of additional nuanced things that we have to deal with besides the silos, I think that Kevin mentioned before, and that is that a lot of times, you know, people will get caught up in what they do best and what they like to do, and don't want to think about the other stuff. So we have all these geographical things to challenge us even more. So I don't have a lot of slides today. Basically, as I was thinking about the topic for today and how transportation and conservation and the intersection there, you know, there's also an intersection with health that I want to talk about a little bit, but I also just want to talk a little and, you know, a little bit about what we're seeing right now, what the trends are, and we've touched on this a little bit already, and what this tells us about what the possibilities could be right now or in the future as we come out of this pandemic phase. This is data that the Nebraska Department of Transportation pulls together on a monthly basis. They look at the number of crashes, the fatalities, and they do break it down by rural and urban and, you know, type of roadway and all these things that you can see here. And as you can see down here at the bottom, I mean, you know, things are really dropping off significantly right now, obviously during this pandemic time and the quarantine and the lockdowns. We've had a significant, you know, drop in the number of cars on the roads, which of course makes a lot of sense. But what's also interesting is that the crash rates have also gone down, which, you know, fewer cars, fewer crashes, okay. But, you know, that may seem like a no-brainer of a statistic, but, you know, if we're trying to get to a safer transportation system for all users of our roads, you know, this is sort of the proof is in the pudding. We have the data right here that shows if we can get fewer people to drive in single occupancy cars every day, our roads are going to be safer. We're going to have fewer crashes, fewer fatalities, and that's obviously what everybody wants. Now, how we get there is another story, but, you know, it's just interesting to see that, you know, there's data staring us right in the face right now that proves out that this is what will happen. I pulled these off the internet and they're kind of fuzzy. I apologize about that. But when it comes to, you know, besides just fewer cars, fewer crashes, the emissions thing is just off the charts too. This is the Los Angeles area, I believe, and Kevin, I'm sure you could verify this for sure. But this is a calendar, and it shows the region and the air quality that particular day of the calendar in the region. And the yellow or this chartreuse color is bad, obviously, and the darker green is good. So you can see in February that, you know, things were not really great. But then once we get down here to March, when the pandemic kind of really hit hard, you know, Southern California hasn't seen air quality, or I guess maybe this is Northern California down here, hasn't seen air quality like this in who knows how long. And the impact that this has on health is huge. During I like to bring this up a lot when I talk about the health impacts. During the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996, Atlanta, is, you probably know, is known for its just positively terrible traffic and congestion and gridlock. And the city knew that if, you know, they wanted to get people down to the heart of downtown Atlanta for the Olympic Games, that this was just going to cause, you know, absolute carpocalypse, I guess, as it were. And so they implemented some policies during the Olympic Games that said, you know what, the only cars allowed to come into downtown, you have to be carpooling, or it has to be off time, or whatever it is. They put in some really, really stringent policies during that time. And as a result, their pediatric ER visits for asthma just flattened out, you know. And when you think about just that particular ER visit, just that one point, that data point, the air quality has that much of an impact. And we know that there are certain neighborhoods in certain parts of our city that are more likely to have asthmatic citizens, that, you know, the air quality is already bad in those areas because they're closer to industrial plants or whatever it might be. And traffic plays a big part of that. Along those same lines, there's been a lot of talk recently about the Green New Deal, and I wanted to bring this up from a policy perspective as well, as sort of a hot topic that we've been watching. You know, I'm sure that everyone that's tuning in today has, you know, is paying attention to the news and knows all about what the Green New Deal is. And, you know, what they're talking a lot about, renewable energy, which is fantastic. They're talking about, you know, creating new jobs. They're talking about, you know, high-speed rail, all of these things that are, you know, environmentally, solar, all these things that they want to include in the Green New Deal. But it's really interesting to me that very little of it, besides like high-speed rail or bus, you know, natural gas buses or whatever, biking and walking is really not part of the conversation that I have really seen, which I find really interesting. I don't know why we wouldn't want to also look at trying to encourage more active transportation in our cities, you know, trying to encourage more people to use the bus. How do we build it to make it safer so that more encouraging more people to do these things? You know, it seems like it's just a missing piece of this puzzle. Maybe it's this little piece right here. I can't see very well, but anyway, you know, so, you know, there's lots of national organizations that we work with, the League of American Bicyclists and others that are trying to reach out and say, hey, you know, we can't forget how big of a deal transportation is on the environment, on conservation, that affects all of these things, and we have to make sure that we account for this. So, you know, so I would encourage you, as somebody who is interested in conservation, who is interested in this Green New Deal and the different components of it, to really make sure that talked about has been on the radar screen for a very long time. It's hard to believe that it's coming up on 10 years that we've
It's been 9 years, Julie, 9 years.
My hair just keeps getting grayer. And the bruise right here from hitting my head on the wall. You know, it was really exciting, the heyday on May Day. I mean, when it was first introduced, you know, oh my gosh, this is exciting. This is fantastic. We're going to make this happen. And then just over time, things start to lose momentum. And as Kevin mentioned, Bike Walk Nebraska was approached by a funder last year to look and see if they could jumpstart this idea by funding a pilot project on Harney. And it is something we've been working on. We thought it could be up and running much sooner than this, but as we all know, things take 10 times longer than they're supposed to these days, or any days. And then, of course, the pandemic has definitely slowed progress from even from a funding perspective. Our funder, you know, has large foundations have their money tied to the stock market, and when it tanked during the pandemic, that created a situation where the foundations had to sort of stop and regroup and think about how they were paying out their grants. So we've had a few things that have been a bump in the road in terms of keeping the momentum going, but the project is continuing. It will happen. It will be from downtown, from 10th Street, and it'll go out to Turner Boulevard. It will be a two-way protected bike lane, and it will be on the south side of Harney, which means it will have to coexist with the bus stops along Harney, which is one of the challenges that we've encountered as we've gone through the planning process for this. We could put it on the north side of Harney, except there's even more challenges with the number of cars that are turning off of Harney, turning left. There's some parking garages along Harney there where there's cars that get backed up. So, you know, there were challenges no matter what, but it's going to be on the south side. And we're almost to the very final design stage, and we'll be, once we get back to a little bit more normal office operations, we'll be going out and doing stakeholder engagement along the corridor so we can talk to business owners, apartment building owners, and other key stakeholders, Downtown Improvement Association and others, about what this means, what it's going to look like, and what they can expect. The majority of the corridor will be a parking protected bike lane. So I could, let me show you my slides. You may have seen a slide earlier in Jason's presentation that showed a street with a bike lane and then the parallel parking along the curb. But a parking protected facility just flips that around, and basically it floats the parallel parking out and it puts the bike lane next to the curb. So the parallel parking, the cars protect the people on bikes that are riding. So that's how it will be much safer. There will also be flexible delineators installed along the route to keep the cars from veering into the lane. So that will be the first of its kind here in Omaha. Lincoln does have a really nice protected bike lane. If you've been to Lincoln, you know the N Street cycle track, as they call it, that goes from 22nd or so down to the Haymarket area. It's highly used. It's really proving its worth. So we're excited that we can finally bring something like this to Omaha. It is a pilot project, as Kevin mentioned. We're working with Omaha Smart Cities to bring this to life. And as we work with Omaha Smart Cities, the whole point of that is to collect as much data as we can so that we can provide the city with, some hard data that shows why this works, how it works, so that we can hopefully implement more of these throughout the city. So there will be counters along the route. There will be cameras that will detect bikes and flip the signals accordingly, and all kinds of great stuff that we'll be able to test out that we don't have in place right now in Omaha. More information is coming soon, but that's kind of what that project is going to look like. Otherwise, we are trying to respond to the pandemic as best we can. I'm sure everyone on this call has, if you looked out your window right now, you would see somebody walking or biking. We've seen, the trail counts have gone off the charts, 100% more usage or more than that than this time last year. People are out and about in their neighborhoods. I saw a bike right there in my own neighborhood go by. People are really getting out and about. Bike shops can't keep bikes on the shelves. Their inventory is getting sold out every day. Bike mechanic and repair services are getting backed up because everyone's digging out their old bikes that have been getting dusty in the garage and needing some repair. We're responding to that by implementing some safe cycling online classes via Zoom. They'll be short. They will be taught by certified instructors that are certified in bicycle safety education. And our goal is to try to keep as many people riding as possible once things start to renormalize, whatever normal is going to look like. We know there's going to be a vast majority probably that will go back to driving, and maybe that bike will get put back in the garage. But what we're hoping is that we can provide a little education that will encourage people to stay riding, maybe take the leap from recreational to transportation, take some of those short trips to the grocery store, the library, ride with your kids to school, whatever it might be, and see if we can harness this momentum and hang on to some of those folks that we know are out there right now. I'm probably getting close to time, so I'll stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Julie. We have one question. Someone's wondering if the bike safety Zoom classes are available to anyone.
They are. They'll be available statewide. They'll be free. We are going to ask for a free will donation, which is not a requirement, but yeah, we're ramping those up right now, and hopefully second week of June or so, we should have more sign-up information available.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know for me, biking, I knew some people who would bike in Los Angeles, as their mode of transportation, which is not a very bike-friendly city either. And they would wear a reflective vest, and make sure that they had all the safety gear. It's so important to have lights and to be able to be seen and all of that. So I'm glad that you guys are doing those safety classes, because
yeah,
definitely don't.
And at the same time, yes, all those things are important, and those are the things that we will cover for sure in our classes. But I think a lot of times if you read the dreaded public pulse letters in the newspaper or whatever, after there's been a crash or a fatality, well, you know, the pedestrian was wearing dark clothing, or there's always this weird victim shaming that goes on with this. And it's like, well, I'm not going to get out of my car and go into my destination and have to put on, I don't have, what if you don't have all this high vis, whatever, I'm just walking across the street. It shouldn't have to require all this, but that victim blaming in the media, that's something we are constantly pointing out.
Yeah.
We're trying to encourage them to do better. It's an ongoing battle.
That's a really interesting piece of the puzzle that you just added there, because it's true. It's not anyone's fault for trying to walk or ride a bike. They should be guaranteed to get to their destination safely without being run off and,
Right. Driving a vehicle is a huge responsibility. We take it for granted, especially in the rural states. It's what we do. It's our right. We're going to do it. It's a huge responsibility to be behind the wheel of a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pound vehicle. And as such, you have a responsibility to watch out for other users on the road. And, that gets missed a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I love that you brought in the health component of all of this, which is, obviously at the very macro level, you want to be able to make sure that you can use active transport and have your health and your safety taken into account. But then when you kind of break it down and chop it up, there are so many more benefits to the community health when you have people actively walking around and being mobile. Planetary health, as you showed with the slides for the air pollution, and then individual health as well. It's like a win-win-win-win for people to engage more with transportation and to start to think about those cultural norms that we just, of course, I'm going to hop in my car. It's going to take me 10 minutes versus it's like, or you could take 45 minutes and walk, but I think and I wonder if that's part of the uptick that we see in people engaging and using the trails and biking more and walking more, is just like kind of that pressure being taken off of like, I have to be somewhere, I can't show up sweaty or something like that. Whereas it's like, show up sweaty, like, tell your boss, hey, this is really important to me. And but I don't know. I feel like that cultural component has been over and over again, kind of looping throughout all these presentations. And then, for me, I also was really struck by your bringing attention to the geographical challenges that we have in Nebraska. And like that rural urban divide is really a tricky one to overcome. And same even in Omaha as a microcosm. It's like the East-West is really, it's really hard to get people to, realize that these things don't necessarily divide us. They're just, we need to have conversations about what's important.
Yeah, and the other thing real quick is that, I think a lot of people, when it comes to active transportation, they think it's all or nothing. They think it's a binary thing, I'm either do it or I'm not. But geez, you do it one day a week. That's 20% less car commuting, right? If you're doing it to your job. The majority of trips we take every day are 2 miles or less. Like 75% of the trips that we take in our car are 2 miles or less. And those are very easily covered on bike and on foot. And we just need to make it safe before people will really want to do it on a regular basis. So it's that safety component that we have to keep working on. And that's the way we're going to get more people to make that leap to get out of their car a little more often.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that. Well, we're at kind of our time here. If you care to, Kevin had to go because he had a different obligation, but as a closing, I'm just kind of curious if you're willing to share with us, yourself, Julie and Jason, kind of why you got into transportation as an issue that you're passionate about. If you want to share any stories that you have.
Yeah, I'll, when I grew up at Scottsbluff, Nebraska, way out on the western side of the state. And, I walk to school K through 12, because even I lived across the street from the high school. So across the street, it was just what we did. And when I had children of my own, I really wanted that to be a part of our life, because it was such a big part of mine growing up. And that's really when it really shifted for me, in terms of, I had sort of been in the wellness health arena before this. But once I realized that, I want my kids to bike to school, that's when it really hit home for me. And it's been just full steam ahead ever since.
Cool. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, so I've been at Metro for going on 4 years now. I moved to Omaha in 2013 from Detroit. I lived there with my now wife, and hadn't paid a ton of attention to like urban form or anything like that. I grew up in Kansas. We drove everywhere. There wasn't a transit system where I was from. But in Detroit, like we did a lot of, I worked for a nonprofit, and my wife worked for a school. And so like equity became a really big deal, right? Especially like transportation equity. Became good friends with some folks that were really interested in transportation and urban design and stuff like that. So that kind of piqued my interest. Moving back to Omaha, we wanted to get closer to family, and I started working at UNO. And when they implemented the PASS program there, and they opened it up for staff and faculty in 2015, I started taking the bus before I had ever thought about working for the transit agency. So it was kind of this like thing where I had this really great experience. And obviously there are hiccups and there are challenges to riding the bus, especially in Omaha, but I really found a lot of love in it. It's a great experience if you've not done it before. And when I talk to people that haven't ridden the bus, it's like to talk about it like it's not often second nature as much if you haven't done it, right? But once you get the feel for it, it becomes second nature. So, I know exactly when my bus is scheduled to be there right now. And I know that on 13th and Vinton, we'll pick up the same woman on the way to work. So there's this like community that develops. And I really started enjoying that. And then it was like, I got to a place in my career, my job at the time, but where I was like, became really passionate about kind of working in the public sector, and a lot of stuff kind of aligned for me. And I'm just really lucky that I get to work a job that lets me kind of chase a passion as well. So it's great. I mean, I love it. I love what we do, but there's a lot of work to be done. So it's a fun challenge, and I'm excited for the next few years for sure.
Yeah, cool. One thing I'll just, as a closing, thank you so much for all of your experiences and knowledge that you shared with us. It's been a really enlightening and informative webinar. And then just one last thought, when you're on a bus, you can use your phone. You can text when you're on a bus, and it's not dangerous. So maybe more young people should do that.
Yeah, that's I mean, and I want to echo Julie's point about it not having to be every day. It can be intimidating, but if you look at like my travel calendar, I'm like, I bike to work. I mean, not anymore. We're doing a little more work from home right now, but I'll bike to work 3 days a week and ride the bus 2 days a week and get a ride from somebody I know, so I like to mix it up a lot, but the time you spend commuting is really valuable. And if you're in your car, there's limited options there. But if you're on a bus, the Wi-Fi is free. You can work on the way. There's a program that I heard of, or maybe an employer somewhere on the West Coast, that they would provide transit passes for their employees because they could count those hours toward work hours. So they would board their transit trip. I think it was a light rail at 8, start working the entire way in, and that was part of their workday. You can read, it's great. The stress levels are quite low. We at one point got like little stickers, like stress stickers, and it's like a kind of a fun experiment to go ride a bus versus having to drive and see how your stress levels are. Because when I started riding the bus and riding my bike, my overall I would say stress levels just from changing my commuting patterns have changed quite a bit. So there's a lot of benefits to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, maybe we'll all run into each other on the bus someday, or walking past each other, biking past each other. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend.